So we're going to talk about dignity, and when we talk about dignity, we're going to talk about what worth means. The Latin word, or the Latin derivation for dignity, is the word worth. And as Andy suggested, there are a number of ways we can establish worth. And I'd like to talk a bit about that tonight, about what value and worth might actually look like if we had a different standard than retirement packages, portfolios, houses, some sort of financial external security. So we're going to spend a few minutes thinking out loud about what it means to have value in an internal sense rather than value as decided or described externally. So when I consider these things, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, well, I don't know if it's first of all or not. Let's just settle down here for a minute. That was getting a little academic. What I'd like to present at first, though, is a sense of what value or worth is. Now, we have had a standard of that in our society over the last 400 or so years, let's say. A Christian kind of free market capitalism external standard of what good or worthy might mean. Now, when we're socialized, we create a kind of intense experience of definition that describes our value in external ways. So when we think about dignity, we start to think about what would a different definition of dignity look like. So I'd like us to kind of just sit for a moment and imagine, what does dignity look like? I've had a photo in my office for the last 20 years, actually, and I'd like to show it to you because it captures my sense of what dignity in the terms I'm talking about might look like. Now, Paul Dix is a good friend of our community. He was the photographer for Witness for Peace for years. And he gifted this to me in about 1984. And I've looked at it every day in my office since. And it captures what I want to convey, or what I want to consider as dignity. So we'll put that up here for us just to kind of consider. Because when we think about dignity, we're thinking about something that is independent of circumstance, it's independent of how you've been conditioned, it's independent of how much you have in the bank. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of considering yourself. And it doesn't happen just kind of haphazardly, the sense of dignity. It's something that has to be worked, discovered, defined, refined, and I'm going to be talking about how we might do that. So let's sink in for a moment to a sense of what you might consider dignity. Do you have a picture of that? Does anything come to mind? Anybody want to share what that might be? Yeah, Richard.
Someone doing something that they totally love.
Somebody doing something that they totally love. He loves to be a grandfather by the looks of it. What else comes to mind when we consider what is dignified? When do you feel dignity?
When you have integrity.
Integrity. When your sense of self matches your experience. Okay? Back there, Janet.
When you stand up for yourself.
When you stand up for yourself, when you take a stand. When we have that dignity, when we take a stand, when we have integrity, when we have meaningful work, or a meaningful sense of presence in our lives, there is a capacity, it feels like, a kind of expansion. I don't feel small anymore. I feel like I have some place to stand. It might just be a shack. It might not have any glory to its appearances, but I have a posture. I'm grounded in something. I feel as if I know who I am. So when we consider how to respect ourselves, how to honor ourselves, how we are right with ourselves, one of the tricks we have to pull on ourselves is how to redefine value. In our second lecture series a couple of years ago, we talked about how shame inhibits our sense of value. And often shame is a technique that is used by socialization to make us feel unworthy or inadequate so that we can be taught how to be good. And so this weird exchange happens. We forfeit our own natural sense of value. A child has no problem feeling value about themselves. They don't know any better. But then we lose that sense when we are instructed in moralistic values, typically by religion. And so when we talk about dignity, we have to talk about how we discover value on different terms than we've been socialized to believe. Task number one. So, one of the ways in which we can approach that challenge is by looking at how we have been trained to think of value. So, what is valuable to you? Somebody, yeah, here. Honesty, ethics. What else? What has value?
Family.
Family. Sense of connection to your loved ones.
Beauty.
Beauty.
Discernment.
Discernment. Being able to know the difference between things.
The journey.
The journey. Seeing life as a journey, not as some sort of haphazard event, but that it has some integrity to it, back to integrity.
Passion.
Passion, a sense of vitality, a sense of aliveness. See, we've been flying pretty high for the last while, if you hadn't noticed. You know, we needed oxygen. We were above 30,000 feet and climbing. And we talk about a bubble, and we talk about a bursting of the bubble and a collapse. We talk about a system that pretended it knew what it was doing, and everybody joined in that folly. We thought that there was no limit to how high we could fly. And we found the limit. There's stories about that. There's myths about that. The Icarus myth, of course, comes to mind. How high can you fly? You're going to get too close to the sun and the wax in your wings is going to melt and you're going to crash into the Aegean Sea and you're going to have a rough time. And we're in the middle of that collapse. What started this whole conversation in my head about dignity was I listened to the news every night. I got a little masochistic there for a while with my wife. We watched it from 5:30 to 6 o'clock with Brian Williams. Thank you, you know. He's a good guy. I like the way he looks. He seems honest. He talks to me about things that are happening, and I feel terrible. Okay. And then, oh, it's not done. Then we watch the Lehrer report to get the intellectual perspective. So by 7 o'clock, I'm pretty depressed. And then we have a nice evening, and then maybe at 10 o'clock, I really want to hit it and watch the BBC News. Just to seal the deal, right? Okay, so I would listen, and I'm talking to Susan, and we think about these things. And it occurred to me in about the middle of January that nobody knows what they're talking about. Nobody knows how this happened. Nobody knows the algorithms or economic models that were used in order to get everybody to invest in whatever it is that they were investing, which was basically bad mortgages that were sold by people who thought they could afford something that they couldn't, and then bundled and sold to other people, like in Taiwan. And suddenly we have this widespread kind of agreement that nobody will really talk about what matters. We'll just keep expanding. And so in order to find a place in that scheme, you had to continually expand. And the belief was that there's going to be more people, more suckers, more ignorance, more participation in the folly that would endlessly feed this idea of grandiosity. It's hard to be dignified when you're moving that fast, because dignity requires a certain kind of collapse in order to access. As long as you're in that eternal youth of expansion, you don't want to talk about contraction, you don't want to talk about descent, and you don't want to talk about anything with depth. Dignity requires depth, dignity requires suffering, dignity requires a descent to get to. So in a way, what is happening is we're finishing our late adolescence as a culture. We had a leader who epitomized that kind of mentality for all its beauty and all of its shadow. We had this idea of talk tough, move fast, be strong, get what you can, expand, and think in black and white terms. Those are characteristics of adolescence. And so as the individual mirrors the culture, and as the culture mirrors the individual, we are finishing our late extended adolescent period. And if any of you are parents to adolescents, we barely survive that experience. If any of you are parents to adolescents, you know there's going to be a crash. There's going to be a deflation. There's going to be something that happens that nobody saw coming. I didn't expect that call at 1 o'clock in the morning from the sheriff's department, did you? No. Suddenly, out of left field, a collapse happens. We are in the middle of that phone call. And we have to be careful of messages of hope and progress and change and getting back to the way things are, because that creates this illusion that we can somehow restabilize how we were and get on with the game. That's not going to happen. I don't think I'm breaking news here. That's not going to happen. A whole fabricated idea of free market economy and religious fervor that is representative of a form of adolescent surety is gone. That's the good news. This then becomes an opportunity for us to understand ourselves in different terms, and those new terms I'm considering or calling dignified. Okay, how we doing? We're all right with me so far? Okay. So, there are a couple of tools that might help us deconstruct and come to some sense of value under these conditions. When something falls apart, we have a couple of human behaviors that get triggered. One is good old-fashioned panic. You thought you knew what was going on, you had everything dialed in, you were doing everything right, and it's not working. And oh my God, panic. Another response that we have to collapse or to when a structure falls apart is depression. Oh my God, in a whole nother way. I feel defeated. I feel like I thought I knew what was going on. I have no longer a sense of reality. So when we consider how to face these times, it requires a combination of psyche, which is the Greek word for soul, and logos, which is the Greek word for the word, or for logic, or for systems. And it requires a combination that we might think about in terms of soul. Now, this is a highly charged word that I've avoided successfully for the last 50 years. I believed it completely for the first 12 years. How old am I? I'm 61. Okay, anyway, you get the picture. I avoided understanding what that term meant because as a son of a minister, that whole term of soul and spirit and forever and eternity and good and being righteous and how you get into heaven really messed me up, personally, because I kept trying to do the right thing. And I never knew when I had done that because it's a moving target, it seems like. And soul was sort of like an escape hatch. It was this like, well, you just have to, you have a soul. Don't worry. It's infinite. It's eternal. Well, I don't know about that. I would like to believe that. That sounds pretty good. Every major religion tells me I have that I've got a place in heaven, I've got a place in paradise, I've got a place in nirvana, I've got a place somewhere after this thing goes away. And so that's appealing. Just like the structures we are talking about economically were appealing when everything was rolling right. Retirement, securities, great language, securities. But I'm going to define soul in a little different way. And I'm going to kind of read that definition because I'm headed towards what dignity means, has to do with maturity, has to do with soul work. And then I'm going to give you some tools about how that might happen. All right? So we're finishing our adolescent phase. We're trying like crazy to mature. Some of us are. Many of us are trying to go back into childhood. But let's imagine we're on an evolutionary cycle or path here that maturity is the next move. And I'm going to say that maturity is your ability to craft your own soul. And I'm going to tell you kind of what that sounds like. And my mentor, James Hillman, says it like this. A deliberately ambiguous concept. I like it already. Resisting all definition in the same manner as do all ultimate symbols, which provide the root metaphor for systems of thought. To that unknown human factor, and this is where I think it gets interesting, which makes meaning possible, which turns events into experiences, and which is communicated in love. So I'm going to use that as a definition of soul. That last part one more time. That unknown human factor which makes meaning possible, which turns events into experiences, and which is communicated in love. I get that somehow here. This is an experience, it's meaningful, and there's a lot of love there. What this means is this experience of soul crafting, of maturing, of dignity requires depth. And that's been forbidden for a while. Well, not forbidden. It's not really been supported. I personally kind of got inhibited over the last 10 years. I didn't know if free intellectual thought was okay, because it felt like it was not okay. Depth is an important quality to consider its nature. What I loved tonight, there was the TV channel was here, they interviewed me earlier tonight, it'll be on at 10 o'clock, what a gas. They called me, what are you? And I said, I'm a psychotherapist. So tonight they put on the 5:30 news, Psychotherapist. I thought that was great. That's what I am. I'm a psychotherapist. And what that means is that I'm not afraid of depth. I'm crazy. Because what has happened is this weird kind of switcheroo where the ability to stand here in community and talk about these sorts of things is a real challenge, because I had been chasing in my own awkward way, because I don't know much about money. My son, my wife, my daughter can attest to that. I just think it's an interesting phenomena, and people pay me, and I go into debt, and we buy things, and it doesn't work out often, but we have no health insurance, we have no savings, we have no retirement, we have no benefit package. We don't have any of those things. So it's hard to lose stuff that you don't have, which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird. Because this whole fixation with external security has been in charge for a long enough period of time to create this false sense of security and a kind of codependency with external structures and definitions, which we've paid a price for in terms of our dignity. Okay? So psyche, soul, the feminine nature of ourselves, and logos, the masculine function of discernment or focus, have to be reconsidered as tools to explore our depth, because it's the only thing we've got, ever have had, and we forgot about it, and the external source of safety has collapsed. And now it's time to consider how to regain a relationship with our soul. There's no more kind of, oh, that's cute time. It's no more, oh, isn't that fascinating? Did you hear what Tate talked about the other night? Goofy stuff, huh? There's no more kind of time for, oh, that's cute. In other words, if evolution is a process which applies to how we think and how consciousness develops, as well as it is an understanding of how species adapt, then the next move we have to make, and we're in the middle of that challenge, is how to wake up to our own sense of where your soul is. what that looks like, how events turn into experiences, how meaning is made possible, and how you communicate in love. Now I'm going to refine that a little now. There is a wellspring within us that we can tap into if you know where to look. One of my favorite places in Montana is in Lewistown with the big spring. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the big spring in Lewistown. It is this incredible torrent of spring water pouring out of the earth. It's a river. That wellspring is within us, and it's called ideas. Ideas comes from the Greek word idola, E-I-D-O-L-A, which is the term for images. When I was preparing for this lecture, I had a dream. And the dream I had about 4 nights ago was of this cathedral structure, this old structure.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please make your final selections to bring them to the
Your plane is about to take off. Go to gate number 4. We get to stay. The library closes. I love that. In community, how that works. They're closing the library. We can stay. Turn off the lights when you go. Yeah, this ain't Detroit. God bless Detroit and the Red Wings. Okay. I had this dream. So we have this cathedral structure, which is what it is. Large doors on a hill in a medieval kind of city. And with those large opening doors, there was this torrent of water coming out of both doors. That's what I mean by wellspring. The ideas that Psyche kicks out is an endless wellspring of possibility that you can't access if you think your worth is dependent on external structures. You're chasing around over here when this spring is gushing over here. We have to learn how to return to the wellspring of images and ideas within ourselves in order to craft our soul. Ideas to make things happen, ideas to earn money, ideas to love somebody else differently. Ideas are the source of crafting your soul. I'm getting pretty worked up. How we doing? Okay, a couple more things, a couple more points. Crafting images is an equivalent of soul making, James Hillman goes on to say. In other words, only when imagination is recognized as an engagement in the borders of the human experience can we talk of soul work or the personal experience of what it means to be dignified. There's only one catch here. When you do this, it feels like you're going crazy. That's a problem. In order to tap into this wellspring of genuine, clear water of ideas, you have to brainstorm. You have to have the capacity to feel like you're mad. There is this French philosopher, I'm in good company, right? Okay. This French philosopher said it like this. His name is Gaston Bachelard. He says this: everything that begins in us with the distinctness of a beginning is a madness of life. Every externalized notion of value and worth has to be put aside in order to experience the direct relationship with what we have been taught is madness, which is a creative, on the edge of your imagination way of seeing. One way to get in touch with that is through our dreams. One way to get in touch with that is through the ability to give over and surrender to a sense of life that is your personal, private conversation. I'm going to talk about how we in community might be able to craft our soul in a minute, but I want to kind of check in with you and take a drink of water. What are you hearing? Where are we going? Questions, thoughts? Let's take a moment.
By suspending, suspending ordinary reality. Suspending all the concepts and theories and meanings and definitions
Yes.
that have defined, that sort of are around us, the wall, the chair, Wall Street, whatever.
Yes.
Suspending the definitions.
Okay, let's think about that for a moment. How reality has been defined is an import. It's not our own creation. We bought a ticket and we took a ride, and that ride's over. The ticket simply means, not that catastrophe is happening, although I had a hell of a sweet moment the other day in my office, which borders Mac's Barbershop, right on Main Street. So I don't know what he hears from my office. I know what I'm hearing from his. And this guy, this wonderful looking guy who wanted to come get a haircut, came in, and I heard as the door closed, he goes, "You know, I think they were right about 2012. And I thought, did he just say that? This guy's, got no hair, he's getting a haircut, and he says, I think they were right about 2012. Now, that's a whole story that we won't go into tonight, but it has to do with a way of understanding time and cycles and the Mayan calendar, and that big cycle of 3,500 years comes to a conclusion here in December 10th of 2012, which is a few years away. So what he was saying was, or what I thought he was saying was that, or I'd imagine what he was saying was that this whole ticket I bought is worthless. What the hell? I paid good money for this. I trusted this whole system. I trusted, as PBS said last night or the other night in this program, because I wanted to get a little more depressed, Inside the Meltdown, maybe some of you have seen it. We have been at the mercy of what they called free market warriors. They were in particular talking about Hank Paulson at the time and the 9 heads of the 9 banks that he called into his office one Monday morning, and everybody came and said, you got to sign this piece of paper right now. We're going to give you a bunch of money. We don't want it. You have no choice. Sign. Interesting conversation, and they called that the free market warrior clan. And the ticket we bought from the free market warriors is invalid. And again, that's the good news. I'm not trying to get all bunchy here. There'll be plenty of ways to survive. As I tell my friends, we know where fresh water is and fresh game is. We're okay. No. It's not going to fall apart like that at all. That's too easy. Maturity is the capacity to deal with irreconcilable paradox. That's what I'm talking about refining. It's not about, oh, it's all great, it's all awful. That's part of that old ticket thinking. That's part of adolescence. My daughter can go from being the most joyful person to total tears in a fraction of a second. It's just remarkable. So what I'm talking about is when we define dignity and maturity in soul, we're talking about a capacity to hold irreconcilable paradox. It's not this and it's not that. It's a tension in between that we have to work, and I'm calling that the cutting edge of the soul work. That ability to hold the tension of not knowing where this is going. We've never known where this is going. We can't know where it's going. It doesn't matter where it's going. If you can feel into what it feels like to be spinning at 17,000 miles an hour and traveling at 65,000 miles an hour in a universe that's expanding at 300,000 light years a minute, then how do you feel? I mean, this is a mystery that we can't conquer. And the point of this crisis and the point of this talk is to give us a sense of dignity about how to be with this. And that requires that you craft your soul. And I'm going to suggest now how we might do that. I had a dream last night, and it was this. I had a cell phone. I was trying to call Susan, trying to call somebody, my wife, the one woman I love, to communicate. This wasn't my cell phone. Went on a journey. Where's my cell phone? How do I communicate? Got another cell phone. It went doink, doink. It had 6 doinks to it. Mine just goes like this. It went doink, 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 doink. And I still couldn't get a hold of her. Then I got my cell phone. This guy. Right. Okay. And yet I had to get over this last barrier, which was this hill of sand. And so I'm clawing through the sand, trying to make the call. And I asked these workers, what is this? What are you building here? And they said, manifestation. Okay. All I want you to think about when we think about dreams is describing them to somebody else each time you have them. Don't interpret them, don't worry about them, just tell the story. That's soul work. Every time you are in the middle of having this intense experience, talk to somebody about it. Every time you sink into your depression and into a sense of melancholy, find words to describe it. That's all I mean by soul work. And I'm going to finish with an idea here that comes from that dream, or the dream in my mind reflects. Psyche Logos. Psyche Logos. I'm tired of psychology. That's the root of the word psychology. But it's got so twisted I can't even keep up with it. There's so many diagnoses and so many ways of talking about what's wrong. It's such a pathological system of thought that it drives me crazy. And I'm a professional. But Psyche and Logos, Psyche Logos, okay? I'd like to introduce the concept of developing Psyche Logos, or psychological neighborhoods. Now, for the last 50 years, spawned by the work of Dr. Carl Rogers, we've understood the beauty of, and the functionality of, and the intensity of small groups. In our town, we have been fostering and creating small groups since 1984. Many of you are in different groups like that. Started up with faculty at MSU with a small group. We started a men's foundation. We started Headwaters Academy. We started dream groups. We started peer groups of individuals, of women, of men. We have worked diligently for the last 25 years to develop this idea of the small group. I'm suggesting now this is the tool we need to evolve through this next period of time into a deeper, soulful way of being with each other. So we have examples in our community of this small group. I'm calling it psychological neighborhood. And what that looks like would be this. If you sometimes just would do a physical neighborhood, I don't know about that so much. The guy across the street really bugs me. I don't have a lot in common with him. He's never waved at me, I always wave at him. Pisses me off. You know, sometimes the neighbors and good fences is a good thing. Containment. All right. How are we doing? All right. It's about 8 o'clock. Good. Winding up. But this idea of psychological neighborhood is an intentional small group of 6 to 10 people that you create with people that you feel comfortable with, that have a diversity of intellect and background and interests, and you meet on a regular basis with a rotating leadership to consider and dialogue about depth. Not as a pastime, not as sports and news, but that you actually realize that you need a vessel to go through this time of tremendous change, and this is what it looks like. It has to be regular, it has to be intentional, and it has to be soulful. It has to be filled with risk-taking, it has to have that rotating leadership. That's not a has to. I'm just getting dramatic here. I'm trying to create an image in your mind where we join together to share the wellspring of our ideas and dreams and imagination in an ongoing small group that might be called a psychological neighborhood or soul crafting.
Experience we're having the last 3 months or so, that connection to strangers is profoundly different than I've ever experienced in my life. I've had numerous telephone calls from complete strangers at my job, and I've had hour-long conversations about the kind of things we're all concerned about in very soulful ways, and it's just amazing. So I think, my point is, I think there's a lot of people out there that are ready to connect with us.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, that's right.
I tend to, when we talk about, finding small groups to feel this connection, we all have that. I have it in numerous ways. I think the frustration that I have is you can get kind of strung out among people. But to create an image of the entire planet right now is that community, and that we need to engage with it as if it is our own community somehow.
Yes, Jim. That's right. And as Nick suggests, as you were talking about, the opportunity for that conversation is really ripe. It's available right now. That small group is a focus group, is all the things that you can imagine a small group is, to give us the courage and to give us that exchange. And yet the conversation is prime. But the people of your nature and your quality and your intelligence who come to such a talk in the evening have a responsibility to take that risk and engage that conversation. You can do it on the phone, you can do it with a credit card company, you can do it with the tire salesman, you can do it with the cook. I had this, anybody who's willing to risk that conversation, you'll reap tremendous rewards. It'll be confirming, and you'll have a sense of dignity. Okay, we're going to make that transition, and thank you very much.